It all started, as most of my life-altering embarrassments do, at a vegan cheese-making workshop. Yes, you read that right. Vegan.
Cheese.
Making. I know. It sounds like something a hipster might dream up after one too many kombucha cocktails, but hear me out. My editor, bless her soul, thought it would make a quirky feature piece for the local arts and culture section of the paper. Me, Quinn, your average, slightly above average height, perpetually anxious reporter, was tasked with diving headfirst into the world of fermented cashews and nutritional yeast. I arrived late, naturally. Public transportation and my internal GPS are locked in a never-ending battle of wills, and on this particular Saturday, the bus decided to take the scenic route through what appeared to be a competitive dog grooming convention. So, picture this, me, hair slightly disheveled, clutching a notepad and pen like a lifeline, bursting into a room filled with serene, kale smoothie sipping enthusiasts who were already elbow deep in almond milk. Not my finest moment, I spotted her immediately. Even amidst a sea of hemp clothing and artisanal aprons, she stood out. Her name was Alex. She was effortlessly cool, with a mischievous glint in her eyes and a smile that could melt glaciers. She was laughing at something the instructor said, and the sound was like a perfectly tuned guitar. I, on the other hand, felt like a rusty trombone trying to keep up with a jazz ensemble, and my initial thought wasn't, "Oh, wow, she's gorgeous." It was, "Oh no, she probably thinks I'm the most uncoordinated human being she's ever seen." Which, statistically speaking, was probably true. I tripped over my own feet trying to find a seat, nearly knocking over a meticulously arranged display of dried herbs. Alex caught my arm, steadying me with a hand that felt surprisingly warm and firm. "Careful there," she said, her voice a low, melodic hum. "Wouldn't want to start a rosemary avalanche." I stammered something that vaguely resembled an apology, acutely aware of the blush creeping up my neck. She just smiled, that glacier-melting smile, and went back to kneading her cashew concoction. The rest of the workshop was a blur of awkward small talk, failed attempts at cheese-making, and furtive glances in Alex's direction. I managed to salvage a semi-edible lump of something that vaguely resembled mozzarella, which I promptly dropped on my shoe. It was a disaster, plain and simple. But amidst the chaos, I knew one thing. I had to talk to her again. The central conflict? Well, besides my crippling social anxiety and the fact that I was supposed to be writing an objective article, Alex was the owner of the artisanal vegan cheese shop where the workshop was held. Which meant, of course, that she was now the subject of my next big story. And as any journalist worth their salt knows, mixing business with pleasure is a recipe for, well, a very complicated and potentially hilarious disaster. But I'm getting ahead of myself. This is just the beginning. Fate, it seems, has a rather twisted sense of humor. After the cheese-making debacle, I figured my chances of ever seeing Alex again were slim to none. I'd filed my story, carefully omitting any mention of the distractingly attractive shop owner, and resigned myself to a life of journalistic integrity and dairy-filled loneliness. Then, the universe decided to throw me a curveball in the form of a burst pipe. It was a Tuesday afternoon, approximately 2:17 p.m., and I was battling writer's block the size of Rhode Island. I'd just brewed my fourth cup of coffee when I heard a horrifying gurgling sound coming from the bathroom. Turns out, the plumbing in my apartment building was about as reliable as my dating life. Within minutes, my tiny studio apartment was transforming into a miniature indoor swimming pool. Panic set in. I frantically called the building manager, who informed me, with a distinct lack of sympathy, that he was out of town and couldn't possibly deal with it until the following week. I considered my options. A. Embrace my new life as an aquatic journalist. B. Move to a drier climate. Or C. Call someone who actually knew what they were doing. Option C won out, but my Rolodex, yes, I still have a Rolodex, I'm retro like that, was sadly lacking in plumbing expertise. Then, in a moment of sheer desperation, I remembered Alex. During the cheese-making workshop, she had casually mentioned being a jack of all trades when it came to her business, including knowing a thing or two about plumbing. It was a long shot, but I was desperate. With trembling fingers, I looked up her shop's number online and dialed. She answered on the second ring, her voice instantly calming my frayed nerves. Conscious Cashews, Alex speaking, she said, her voice warm and inviting. Alex, it's Quinn, I stammered. From the cheese workshop? There was a brief pause.
Quinn. Hey.
How's that vegan mozzarella coming along? Not great, I admitted. Actually, that's kind of why I'm calling. I have a small plumbing emergency. I explained the situation, trying to downplay the rising water levels and the growing sense of impending doom. To my utter shock, she didn't laugh or hang up. Instead, she said, "Give me 20 minutes." 20 minutes later, Alex arrived, armed with a wrench, a roll of duct tape, and an undeniable aura of confidence. She surveyed the scene, her expression a mix of amusement and concern. "Wow," she said, "you weren't kidding about the emergency." For the next hour, she worked tirelessly, navigating the flooded bathroom with the grace of a seasoned plumber. I watched, mesmerized, as she tightened pipes, wrapped joints, and generally wrangled the rogue plumbing system into submission. At one point, she emerged from the bathroom, soaked to the bone, with a triumphant grin. "I think that did it," she announced. "Just keep an eye on it for the next few hours." I was speechless. Not only had she saved my apartment from becoming an indoor swimming pool, but she'd also managed to look effortlessly cool while doing it. I don't know what to say," I stammered. "Thank you. Seriously, thank you." She shrugged, brushing a stray strand of hair from her face. "No problem. Just doing my civic duty. Besides," she added with a wink, "I couldn't let a fellow cheese enthusiast drown in their own apartment." As she gathered her tools, our eyes met. There was a flicker of something there, a spark of connection that made my heart skip a beat. It was more than just gratitude, it was attraction. And that's when the conflict really began. Because here she was, saving the day, being unbelievably charming, and all I could think about was how completely unprofessional it would be to pursue a relationship with the subject of my next article. The moral of the story? Plumbing emergencies are rarely convenient, but sometimes they can lead to unexpected connections. And sometimes, those connections can make your life a whole lot more complicated. The days that followed were a delicate dance of awkward encounters and undeniable attraction. I tried to maintain a professional distance, reminding myself that Alex was a source, not a potential girlfriend. But it was like trying to hold back a tidal wave with a beach towel. I found myself making excuses to visit Conscious Cashews. Research. I'd tell myself, grabbing my notepad and heading out the door. I need to observe the shop's ambience, the customer interactions, the cheese selection process. Anything to justify spending a few extra minutes in Alex's orbit, and she, bless her heart, seemed equally drawn to me. She'd offer me samples of her latest creations, a smoked paprika cashew cheddar that was surprisingly addictive, a truffle-infused brie that made my taste buds sing. We'd talk for hours, leaning against the counter, surrounded by the comforting aroma of fermented nuts and good intentions. I learned about her passion for sustainable living, her love for rescued animals, and her surprisingly extensive knowledge of obscure 80s music. She, in turn, seemed genuinely interested in my often muddled stories, my crippling fear of public speaking, and my borderline unhealthy obsession with true crime podcasts. One afternoon, I was shamelessly flirting, when a customer came in, complaining about a recent purchase. He was loud, demanding, and generally unpleasant. Alex, ever the professional, tried to appease him, but he just kept escalating the situation that I watched, my anxiety levels rising as the man's voice grew louder and angrier. I knew how much Alex poured her heart and soul into her business, and the thought of this entitled jerk ruining her day made my blood boil. Without thinking, I stepped forward. "Excuse me," I said, my voice surprisingly firm, "but I think you're being a little unfair. This is a small business, and mistakes happen. But I've been coming here for weeks, and I can honestly say that Alex's products are top-notch." The man glared at me, clearly taken aback. "And who are you?" he sneered. "Just a satisfied customer," I replied, "who believes in supporting local businesses." He huffed, muttered something under his breath, and stormed out of the shop. Alex stared at me, her eyes wide with surprise. "Wow," she said. "I didn't know you had that in you." I shrugged, feeling a strange mix of embarrassment and pride. "I just hate seeing people being jerks," I mumbled. She smiled, a genuine, heartfelt smile that sent shivers down my spine. "Well," she said, "I really appreciate it. Thanks for sticking up for me." That night, I couldn't stop thinking about her smile, about the way she looked at me, about the undeniable connection that was growing between us. I replayed our conversations in my head, analyzing every word, every gesture, searching for any sign that she felt the same way, but the guilt was always there, lurking in the shadows. I was a reporter, and she was my subject. Pursuing a relationship would be a breach of journalistic ethics, a betrayal of my professional integrity. And yet, the thought of not pursuing her was almost unbearable. The tension was building, thick and palpable. Small moments of hesitation, lingering glances, accidental brushes of hands, they all added up to a growing sense of anticipation. I knew I was walking a dangerous line, but I couldn't seem to stop myself. One evening, as I was leaving the shop, Alex caught my arm. "Hey," she said, her voice a little softer than usual. "I was wondering, would you want to grab dinner sometime?" "Just as friends, of course." Just as friends. The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. My heart pounded in my chest. "I'd like that," I managed to say, my voice barely a whisper. As I walked home that night, I knew I was in trouble. Deep, irreversible, hopelessly in love with the subject of my article, trouble. And I had absolutely no idea what to do about it. The scent of her perfume, a subtle blend of vanilla and sandalwood, lingered in the air, a constant reminder of the delicious, agonizing predicament I had gotten myself into. The just as friends dinner turned out to be anything but. We went to a small, cozy Italian restaurant tucked away on a quiet side street. The candlelight flickered, casting dancing shadows on the walls, and the air was filled with the comforting aroma of garlic and oregano. We talked for hours, about everything and nothing, about our dreams, our fears, our favorite books, and the absurdities of modern life. I found myself opening up to her in ways I never had with anyone before. She listened intently, her eyes filled with genuine interest, and I felt seen, truly seen, for the first time in a long time. As the evening wore on, the conversation turned more personal. We talked about our past relationships, the heartbreaks, and the lessons learned. I confessed my insecurities, my fears of commitment, my tendency to overthink everything. She, in turn, shared her own vulnerabilities, her struggles with self-doubt, her longing for a deeper connection. With each shared secret, the tension between us grew. The air crackled with unspoken desires, and I could feel my resolve weakening. I knew I should maintain my distance, that pursuing a relationship would be a mistake. But I couldn't help myself. I was drawn to her like a moth to a flame. After dinner, we walked along the riverfront, the city lights shimmering on the water. The air was cool and crisp, and the silence between us was charged with anticipation. I could feel her gaze on me, and my heart pounded in my chest. We stopped in front of a small park, overlooking the city. The moon hung high in the sky, casting a silvery glow on the trees. "Quinn," she said softly, her voice barely a whisper. I turned to face her, my breath catching in my throat. Her eyes were locked on mine, filled with an intensity that made my knees weak. "I need to tell you something," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "What is it?" I asked, my voice barely audible. She took a deep breath, her chest rising and falling. I have feelings for you, Quinn. Strong feelings." The words hung in the air, suspended between us. I knew, deep down, that I felt the same way. But the fear, the guilt, the professional implications, they all weighed heavily on my mind. "Alex," I said, my voice shaking, I don't know what to say." She reached out and gently touched my cheek, her fingers warm against my skin. "You don't have to say anything," she whispered. Just tell me if you feel it too." I closed my eyes, trying to block out the doubts, the fears, the complications. All I could feel was her touch, her presence, the undeniable pull that drew me to her. I opened my eyes and looked at her, my heart overflowing with a mix of fear and desire. "I do," I whispered. "I feel it too." A slow smile spread across her face, lighting up her eyes. "Then," she said, her voice barely audible, "can I do this?" Before I could answer, she leaned in and kissed me. The world seemed to fade away. All I could feel was her lips on mine, soft and warm and intoxicating. It was a gentle kiss, a tentative exploration, but it was enough to send shivers down my spine. We broke apart, breathless, our eyes locked on each other. The silence was deafening, filled with unspoken emotions and unresolved tension. "Wow," I managed to say, my voice trembling. She chuckled softly. "Yeah," she said. "Wow." We stood there for a moment, caught in a web of unspoken desires and conflicting emotions. I knew I should pull away, that I should end this before it went any further. But I couldn't. I was too far gone. "Alex," I said, my voice barely a whisper, I need to tell you something." She looked at me, her eyes filled with a mixture of anticipation and concern. "I'm a reporter," I said, my voice heavy with guilt, "and you're the subject of my next article." The smile vanished from her face. Her eyes widened in shock, and the warmth that had been there just moments before turned to ice. "What?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I know," I said, my voice breaking. "It's awful. I should have told you sooner. But I was afraid." She stepped back, putting distance between us. "So," she said, her voice cold and hard, everything was just research for your story?" "No," I protested. "It wasn't like that. I really do have feelings for you, but I can't deny that I'm a reporter, and this is my job." She shook her head, her eyes filled with disbelief and hurt. "I can't believe you," she said, her voice laced with anger. I thought you were different." Without another word, she turned and walked away, leaving me standing alone in the park, the weight of my betrayal crushing me. The city lights seemed to mock me, and the cool night air sent a chill down my spine. I had crossed a line, and I had no idea how to come back. The walk home was a blur of tears and regret. Each step echoed the pounding in my head, a relentless reminder of my colossal screw-up. I had not only jeopardized a budding relationship, but had also potentially destroyed Alex's trust in me, maybe even her business. The guilt was a suffocating blanket, smothering any hope of redemption. The next few days were a living hell. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't even bring myself to look at my laptop. The story I was supposed to be writing felt like a lead weight chained to my ankle, dragging me further into the depths of despair. I tried calling Alex, leaving apologetic voicemails that probably sounded more pathetic than sincere. She didn't answer. I even considered going to her shop, begging for forgiveness, but the thought of facing her cold, disappointed stare paralyzed me with feared, my anxiety, usually a manageable hum, cranked up to a deafening roar. I imagined the headlines. "Reporter betrays local business owner for sensational story." My career, my reputation, everything I had worked for felt like it was crumbling around me. To make matters worse, my editor, sensing my unusual lack of productivity, started sniffing around. She's a tough but fair woman, and I respect her immensely, but I knew that confessing my ethical breach would not go over well. "Quinn, honey, what's going on?" she asked during our weekly check-in. "You're usually bursting with ideas, but this week you seem distracted." I stammered, dodging the question with vague excuses about writer's block and personal issues. She raised a skeptical eyebrow, but didn't press further.
Yet.
I knew I couldn't keep her in the dark forever. The story was due in a week, and I had absolutely nothing. Adding another layer of complication, my best friend, Maya, sensed something was amiss. Maya is my rock, the one person who always knows how to make me laugh, even when I feel like the world is ending. But I couldn't bring myself to tell her the truth. The shame was too overwhelming. "You've been acting weird lately," she said over coffee one afternoon. "Are you seeing someone?" You've got that "I'm hiding something" look in your eyes. I forced a laugh, denying everything. Just stressed about work, I said, hoping she wouldn't see through my flimsy lie. But Maya knows me too well. Come on, Quinn, she said, her voice softening. You can tell me anything. Are you okay? The urge to confess, to unburden myself, was almost unbearable. But the thought of disappointing her, of confirming her suspicions that I was capable of such a reckless act, held me back. Meanwhile, the silence from Alex was deafening. I agonized over what to do, replaying our last conversation 1,000 times in my head. Had I ruined everything? Was there any way to salvage the situation? Then, one evening, I received a text message. It was from Alex. Meet me at the riverfront. 8 p.m. My heart leaped with a mixture of hope and dread. This was it. The moment of truth. I had no idea what she wanted to say, but I knew that my future, both personally and professionally, hung in the balance. As I walked towards the riverfront, I braced myself for the worst. Rejection, anger, maybe even a lawsuit. I was prepared for anything. But nothing could have prepared me for what I found when I arrived. Alex was standing in the same spot where we had shared our first kiss, her silhouette outlined against the city lights. She looked tired, her shoulders slumped, but there was a determined set to her jaw. I've been thinking, she said, her voice flat and emotionless. About everything. My heart sank. This wasn't going to be good. I can't pretend that what you did didn't hurt me, she continued. It did. It made me question everything I thought I knew about you. I opened my mouth to apologize, but she held up her hand, stopping me. But, she said, taking a deep breath, I also know that you're not a bad person, Quinn. You made a mistake, a big one, but I believe that you're capable of learning from it. Hope flickered within me, a tiny spark in the darkness. I'm willing to give you a second chance, she said, her voice softening slightly. But on one condition. My breath caught in my throat. What condition? I asked, my voice barely audible. You have to tell your editor the truth, she said, her eyes locked on mine. You have to be honest about what happened, and you have to accept the consequences, whatever they may be. The weight of her words settled upon me, heavy and inescapable. Telling my editor the truth meant risking my career, my reputation, everything. But I knew, deep down, that she was right. I couldn't move forward, couldn't rebuild her trust, without facing the consequences of my actions. Okay, I said, my voice trembling. I'll do it. Alex nodded, a flicker of relief in her eyes. Good, she said. Because if you don't, there's no chance of us ever being together. And, she added, her voice laced with a hint of vulnerability, I really want there to be a chance. The suspense hung in the air, thick and suffocating. I had made a promise that could cost me everything. But I also knew that it was the only way to earn back Alex's trust and, more importantly, my own self-respect. The road ahead would be long and difficult, but for the first time in days, I felt a glimmer of hope. A hope that maybe, just maybe, I could find a way to salvage this mess and build something real with the woman who had become my biggest story. The question was, at what cost? The next morning, I walked into my editor's office, my heart hammering against my ribs. I had rehearsed my confession 100 times in my head, but the words still felt clumsy and inadequate. She looked up from her computer, her expression unreadable. Quinn, have you made any progress on the vegan cheese story? She asked, her voice sharp, but I took a deep breath and plunged in. I need to tell you something, I said, my voice trembling. It's about the story, but it's also about me. I recounted the entire story, from the awkward cheese-making workshop to the kiss on the riverfront, laying bare my ethical breach and my conflicted feelings. I held nothing back, sparing myself no embarrassment or judgment. As I spoke, I watched her expression shift from curiosity to disbelief to a sort of weary disappointment. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair, her silence more damning than any words she could have uttered. Quinn, she said finally, her voice low and controlled, I'm incredibly disappointed in you. I trusted you. and you abused that trust. This is a serious breach of journalistic ethics, and it has consequences. I braced myself for the worst. I knew that termination was a possibility, and I wouldn't have blamed her. "I'm not going to fire you," she said, surprising me. "You're a talented writer, and I believe you're capable of learning from this mistake." "But," she added, her voice hardening, "you're suspended without pay for 2 weeks. And you're not allowed to write about conscious cashews or Alex ever again. Is that understood?" "Yes," I said, relief flooding through me. "Thank you. I understand." The suspension was a blow, both financially and emotionally. But it was also a wake-up call. I had let my feelings cloud my judgment, and I had paid the price. I spent the next 2 weeks soul-searching, reflecting on my mistakes, and trying to figure out what I wanted from my life. I realized that journalism wasn't just a job for me. It was a passion, a calling. And I couldn't let a momentary lapse of judgment ruin everything I had worked for. When my suspension ended, I returned to work with a renewed sense of purpose. I apologized to my colleagues, promising to earn back their trust. I threw myself into my work, tackling challenging stories with a newfound determination and integrity. As for Alex, we started slowly, cautiously rebuilding our relationship. We talked, really talked, about our feelings, our fears, and our expectations. It wasn't easy. There were moments of doubt, of hesitation, of lingering mistrust. But we persevered, driven by a genuine connection and a shared desire to make things work. We never discussed the original article, the one that had brought us together and almost torn us apart. It remained a silent, unspoken reminder of the mistake I had made. Months later, I was assigned to cover a local food festival. As I wandered through the stalls, sampling artisanal cheeses and gourmet chocolates, I spotted a familiar face. It was Alex, standing behind a booth adorned with a Conscious Cashews logo. She saw me and smiled, a genuine, heartfelt smile that made my heart soar. "Hey," she said, her eyes sparkling. "Fancy seeing you here." "Just doing my job," I said, returning her smile. We talked for a few minutes, catching up on each other's lives. As I was about to leave, she stopped me. "Quinn," she said, her voice softening, "I wanted to thank you for telling the truth, for facing the consequences, for being willing to rebuild our relationship." "Thank you," I said, "for giving me a second chance." We stood there for a moment, our eyes locked on each other. The air crackled with unspoken emotions, with a sense of shared history and a quiet understanding. "So," I said finally, breaking the silence, "how's the cheese business?" She laughed, a light, melodic sound that filled me with joy. "Thriving," she said. "In fact," she added with a mischievous grin, "I'm thinking of expanding. Maybe opening a second location." "Really?" I said, raising an eyebrow. "Where?" "I don't know yet," she said, shrugging. "But I'm thinking of a location with a really good reporter, someone who knows the local food scene and isn't afraid to ask the tough questions." I laughed, my heart overflowing with happiness. "I think I know just the person," I said. We smiled at each other, a silent promise passing between us. The future was uncertain, but we were together, and that was all that mattered. I learned a lot during those tumultuous months. I learned about journalistic ethics, about the importance of honesty and integrity, about the power of forgiveness and the resilience of the human heart. But most importantly, I learned about myself. I learned that I was capable of making mistakes, but I was also capable of learning from them. I learned that I was stronger than I thought, more resilient than I knew, and more deserving of love than I had ever believed. As I walked away from the food festival, the sun warm on my face, I felt a sense of peace and contentment wash over me. I had made mistakes, I had faced challenges, but I had emerged stronger, wiser, and more in love than ever before. And as I looked ahead to the future, I knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, I could face them with courage, with honesty, and with the love of the woman who had become my biggest story. It was a hopeful new beginning, a testament to the power of forgiveness, and a reminder that sometimes the greatest stories are the ones we never expect to write.